Hello there, this is part 3 of Lucy Letby, A Different Story, and this section will focus on the management of the Countess of Chester Hospital. Some of the summary points I'm going to read through now are based in fact, and some of them are more my inferences and opinion, and I think it will be hopefully quite clear which is which. You'll be able to check the ones that are obviously factual, but the other ones are more inferences about what I think happened once the police investigation got underway. Again, this is not an exhaustive list, it's just a set of summary points that have struck me en route with regard to reading about this case from various sources. The management of the neonatal ward and the CoCH management more generally became aware of the campaign of blame and bullying the group of paediatric consultants were engaged in against an individual young nurse, a nurse who had an excellent record and who was a mainstay of the neonatal unit. A nurse that was very well thought of by her nursing manager and her other nursing colleagues. The nurse who'd been bullied brought a grievance process in relation to the consultant's campaign of bullying and scapegoating against her, and the management upheld this grievance in every respect. The management then told the bullying consultants to desist or else face serious consequences in relation to their fitness to practice. They were told that they had crossed a line and that they were no longer to cross that line, and they were threatened with being reported to the GMC. So it was a very serious matter for them and a very serious warning given to them by the chief executive at the time. The 2016 RCPCH report also found that no individual nurse was to blame for the systemic problems in the neonatal unit. It also commended the nurse who was the subject of the consultant's bullying, and spoke of how well she was regarded by her nursing colleagues and the nursing management. The management, by way of an apology on behalf of the trust, offered to fund a master's course for the nurse who had been bullied, and also to offer specialist secondment at a tertiary, that is a level 3 unit, and that unit being Alderhay, to get extra training, specialist training. The management stuck by the nurse who had been attacked by the group of consultants and sought to protect her up until late April 2017, when the bullying consultants ensured the police were brought in. Key members of the management then either retired or withdrew their services from the CoCH, Countess of Chester Hospital. The nursing manager continued to support the bullied nurse for a considerable time after she had been removed from her nursing duties. So that's a series of points that are quite positive with regard to the management's approach to one of their staff members, a nurse being bullied by a group of doctors. But now some of these points in relation to the case as a whole have become slightly more critical and negative, really. So I'll start with those, or I'll continue with those, I should say. The management failed to inquire into issues with regard to sepsis on the neonatal ward in relation to the spike in deaths across 2015 and 16. And likewise, they did not order a higher level of infection control or an assessment of the possible pathogens that had infected that ward, they allowed the dangerous hospital wastewater system to creak on, being fixed and patched up week on week, but never conclusively putting in the safeguards that were necessary there, or ordering the assessment of possible pathogens that were on that ward. And you could say that initially should have been the responsibility of the consultants, but really there was a management structure to that ward, and seemingly they did nothing about it. Are they relying on the consultants to tell them that there are a number of babies being queried for sepsis or with diagnosis of sepsis? I suppose so, yes, but nonetheless, you'd think they'd have their once the deaths start happening, there should have been a dialogue between the management and the consultants about what is happening here. Not who's on duty, but what is happening to the babies. Not who is on duty, but what is happening to them, and is there a problem with pathogens on the ward? And they must be aware, both the management and the consultants, that there have been many cases across the world, in Britain and many other countries, in which pathogens take a hold, whether it's a neonatal unit or another very vulnerable patient population. And once that can happen, there could be many deaths and many health deteriorations that flow from that. The management failed to address the chronic understaffing on the neonatal ward, where both nurses and doctors were working outside of safe guidelines. Often 2 or 3 very high acuity neonates were assigned just one nurse to look after them, instead of the 1-to-1 requirement. The management failed to get a grip on the failings and incompetences of the consultants and other doctors in the neonatal ward across the years in question, 2015-2016, nor did they insist on or ensure a safe level of consultant ward rounds. The management must have been aware that they were failing to meet safe targets and the safe operation of that ward, but seemingly they did nothing about it during those years. And if it's not their responsibility, well, whose is it? Whose was it? There is evidence for bullying at management level, including the case of the later chief executive, who ended up in 2022 bringing a case of constructive dismissal against the trust. Once the police investigation was underway, and once Evans and the gang of 4 consultants had coalesced to effectively run the investigation, i.e. its parameters and scope, the management withdrew their support of the bullied nurse to all intents and purposes and let events take their course. Again, they drew no attention to the obvious issues with sepsis in the hospital generally and the likely pathogens infecting the neonatal ward, in particular due to the drainage system that was in a chronically dangerous state that they must have known about, and they clearly didn't want to put that on the table as one of the possible means by which they could further protect an individual from being scapegoated. That was too much of a risk for them, it would seem. And these are as I said at the beginning, these are some of my inferences and my opinions. So perhaps once the momentum of the fake serial killer story was well underway, the management, i.e. the trust as a whole, acting in the way the NHS tends to, simply offered up the bullied nurse as a scapegoat for all the faults of the neonatal ward and its running. And that running of the ward and the hospital is finally the management's responsibility. Perhaps they saw the alternative as being a large number of medical negligence claims against the hospital and chose, in their eyes, the lesser of 2 evils, financially. The management of the trust should, in my opinion, have liaised with the police rather than the consultants from the neonatal ward doing so. And those consultants, all the doctors that worked on that neonatal ward, should have been treated as witnesses by the police and even possible suspects. But of course they were not. In conclusion, the management supported the bullied nurse only so far, and indeed some of the managers who had taken that approach were in their turn forced out. In the end, the choice of managers and powerful figures further up the NHS food chain decided to no longer support an innocent nurse. They threw her to the dogs, essentially. I believe the trust management should have ordered inquests into the deaths across the period in question, and this should have been the point of liaison between the trust and the police. And I believe the trust should have also investigated in a very profound way the potential for the hospital wastewater system to have been the cause of those deaths and those crashes across those years. But it seems as though, as with the consultants, they didn't want to touch that in any way at all, because they knew it would bring a potential very large raft of medical negligence claims against the hospital, or just negligence claims per se in terms of the safe running of a hospital, from all the parents that had lost babies or had babies. The health of their children, their babies, had deteriorated greatly. So that's what should have happened, but instead what did happen is the police brought in a very dangerous individual, or rather he inserted himself, and they hooked up because they wanted the same thing, a bit of glory. This dangerous individual is called Dr. Dowie Evans, who had made a pretty penny for some years impersonating an expert. And so thereafter the investigation into the spike of deaths and crashes and their actual cause or causes was hopelessly corrupted and muddied forever and completely lost. Thank you. I'm referring to a bullied nurse and a persecuted nurse because we all know who it happened to. But I think the fact of the matter is, as somebody said on Twitter the other day, that if it hadn't have been the person who it did happen to, those consultants would have been looking for someone else that was there. They wanted to choose someone, and they just chose that person. Partly because they were very conscientious and very good at their job. But had she not been working there, it would likely have been someone else they chose, a different nurse. They were out for a scapegoat. They were out to persecute someone. And that's what they did. Thank you for listening. Bye-bye.